that day I live in a dream. I live in a dream.
Welcome to Only Trying to Help, the podcast where we try to help you be helpful to other people. My name is Dr. Kate Watson, and I'm here with Mo McGee. Would you like to introduce yourself, my friend?
Yes. Hi, my name is Mo McGee. I am a social worker currently working in the city of Philadelphia. I have experienced probably the last 8 or 9 years working mainly within the housing and homelessness areas, whether that is emergency shelters, permanent supportive housing, or any other types of additional service supports. That include a lot of different types of subpopulations, but for the majority of my career, I've been working mostly in housing and homelessness.
Thanks for that, Mo. And, already I'm sure our listeners are probably giving a reaction that you're used to, which is something like, oh, wow, that's really hard work and that's really sad. Can you just tell us like a few things that you love about it?
I love that question. I'm sure you get this too, but a response I get a lot is that must be so rewarding, or wow, that's really good work you do. And it's like, yeah, that's great, but there is a lot more to it. And I think some of the more positive reactions I get are when people are familiar with that type of work or have some understanding or background from it. That way I'm not the person constantly explaining what that may mean, or I also get excited to defy people's expectations. I think with media, we get an idea of what unhoused people may look like, or what, their situations may be, and we have it all figured out. But I think sometimes challenging those stereotypes and expectations can be really rewarding too. And seeing someone listen and react, definitely a great part of the job.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for that. So, you and I are recording this at the end of November, and it will go out into the world sometime in mid-December. It's a time of year when a lot of people tend to get involved with donations, volunteer work. They're going to give some hours at a soup kitchen. They're going to collect food or winter coats. And it's a really common time of year for people to engage in those activities, even when maybe they don't engage in those activities all year long. Something about November and December brings this out of us, and I'm laughing, but I mean, it is a lovely thing that people do. One of the things I was curious about, though, and it's why I asked you to join me, is what are some of those well-meaning things that people might do when they're trying to help someone, quote unquote, less fortunate, that maybe aren't that helpful? Does anything come to mind for you?
Yes, it's really funny that you say volunteer at soup kitchens. I think that is usually the picture that we have of when we're being good people or helping people. Again, media may have promoted that, seeing like shows where people are just serving soup with a ladle and can feel good about themselves. I think that is obviously a good thing, especially around this time of year. It can be really hard for participants in programs or people who are unhoused to. Holidays are definitely a hard time. So having more support in those areas is always a good thing. But I think sometimes the term slacktivism comes to mind, which was kind of coined in the idea that people are just kind of going along with trends that they think are helpful for people, or seeing what's popular and donating and supporting those causes, as opposed to understanding those causes a bit more deeply. The best example of slacktivism I can think of is when Tom's Shoes had the whole campaign about, you buy a pair of shoes, we donate a pair of shoes. And then they ended up having too many shoes to donate, and there was not a need for shoes in the areas they were being donated to. So I think sometimes people are like, well, let me just give and I can do this, or I can do the soup kitchen, I can donate socks, without actually understanding what shelters and programs actually are in need of, and kind of eliminating that research step within their goal to try to be helpful and to try to feel good about their service.
Yeah. As you were describing that, I just started to have all these memories of So all through college and graduate school, I worked in residence life. So as an undergrad, I was an RA in the dorms. And then in
Mhm.
grad school, I was a hall director where I had like a team of RAs. And I remember having all these very well-meaning RAs show up at my door with like shopping carts full of canned goods they had collected. And they said, well, we got our floors together and we did a food collection and look at all this food we got. And I said, that's wonderful. Where is it going? And they said, well, we don't know. And I said, well, I don't know. And we called around. This was in New York City. We called around to so many places, and every place said, please do not bring that here. We are overflowing. We have stuff that's just going to expire. It's going to go to waste. Please, we are beyond capacity with our pantries are overflowing. And I don't even know the end of the story. I can't even remember what happened to all that food. I mean, I think at one point we just like rolled it into the basement of the building and we were like, we're going to have to figure out this another day because like it was getting dark. So your point is well taken that like don't just start a food collection or a clothing collection or old shoes or whatever it may be and think, well, surely someone needs this. Do your research.
Yeah, and I think it's very well intentioned too. Like you're saying, it's coming from a really good place. But I can remember when I used to work in a shelter that there was some sort of article or something that came out that's saying shelters need socks more than any socks and underwear, the most needed items. And we would get these inpouring of socks and underwear to the point where it wasn't needed. And so we just kept getting them as opposed to like, well, we could also use, clothes and a suit jacket and, pants and winter coats and things like that. But because it was more of a popular item to donate or thinking, oh, the shelter will take this, we just got too much and it was not helpful at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. I can remember seeing on TV news coverage of, gosh, it was some natural disaster. I want to say it was like a hurricane or an earthquake in a very warm location. And the coverage was showing just how everybody's been devastated and they've lost everything and please send help. And again, well-meaning people, lovely, well-meaning people like packaged up winter coats and like prom dresses and stiletto shoes and shipped all this stuff to this location and actually clogged up their ability to get the supplies that were supposed to come in, and it took up someone's time, some person who was supposed to be there like administering healthcare to people was like, I'm in charge of removing all the high heel shoes that we can't do anything with. And so I think a lot of people have this mindset of like something is better than nothing, and that's not true.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think there's simple ways to address that as well. Contacting, maybe shelters in your area or other nonprofits that may be near you that you want to get more involved in and asking them what they do need. It could be time, it could be money, it could be supplies. I know a lot of places who have, websites will post wish list around this time of year of what kind of donations they would like to accept. And it just takes, slacktivism is the idea that you can be helpful with little effort. So just putting a little bit of effort into it, though, does go a much longer way.
Yeah. Yeah. So rather than doing the bare minimum, just slightly more than that would actually be very helpful.
Exactly.
Um, I only have one other thing I wanted to say about donations, and then maybe we can like, think bigger than that. But maybe you can tell me if this is just another one of those things that, you hear, but I've heard that one of the real what do I want to call it? Like sticking points or problem areas is folks receiving these donations are getting things that require fresh ingredients to be mixed in, like a cake mix, but it needs milk and butter and eggs, and not everybody has milk, butter, and eggs. So
Mhm.
I've always heard like whatever you do donate should be something that can kind of stand on its own. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it depends a little too on the setting. There's a lot of low income housing facilities, like nonprofits and places that do have some sort of more permanent supportive housing and people who are in a bit more independent setting. So thinking about what is going to be most helpful for those people, yeah, eggs are expensive, and sometimes there's things they're not always able to get. Sometimes the the quickest, easiest meals are the ones they kind of gravitate more to. But I think, yeah, having that kind of intention behind donations too, I think can go a long way, especially and for shelters. They don't always have the resources to feed a lot of people, and there's a kitchen staff doing the best they can with the resources that they have. So if they get something a bit different than what they're used to or fancier than they're used to, they may not know what to do with it.
Yeah.
But also shout out to all the great kitchen staff that I've worked with because they do a lot with a little.
Yeah. Yeah. Really good point. Thanks for adding that. I'm sure the creativity that takes, I probably don't even know. I was thinking about other things, outside of donations and all, like I'll bet in this world there may be a lot of folks who do a kind of performative helping that's like for social media. They get their camera out and it's like, look at me, talking to a person who's sleeping on the street. Like, I don't know. Do you have thoughts about that, Mo? Do you have any ideas about how folks could maybe challenge themselves to be better than that?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like there's just so much content in media these days, and I don't think I even know like a quarter of what people are actually posting on the internet. So my initial thought is that if someone is recording themselves with someone who's living on the streets or somewhere unsheltered living currently, that they have the permission of that person to do so and their consent, because otherwise it feels exploitive to talk about, hey, here's this person's circumstance, and I am taking my time to talk with them, and then they may just leave and never, actually do any of that step work or footwork afterwards. So I would hope that that person has permission to be spoken with. Maybe they want to engage. And I just think too about like what good that's actually doing. I can't speak to a lot of influencers or lifestylists or what kind of audience they do have and how much of a difference they can make. I don't know how as much about that kind of stuff, but I also feel like there's so much more behind the scenes you can be doing to help where you don't have to put the spotlight on you as opposed to the cause itself. And I would just challenge people to think about why they're doing it.
Yeah. I think you're even being more generous than I was, considering, you went to think, well, I guess there's a possibility someone has a wide audience. Maybe this could do some good. I wasn't even thinking that. I guess that's a good point. But I've long been thinking we need to do a whole episode of this podcast about performative helping, because it's
Oh,
not
yeah.
just in that scenario. I mean, even in our families, we see some performative helping, like, look at me going to do the dishes. So I was thinking performative helping is something I want to do a deep dive into one day. Maybe today's not that day, but this is just a small taste of it.
No,
What if
I think that's a great topic too. I'm always thinking about intent versus impact and how, we can come into things well intentioned and wanting to do the most with the intent. But if we're not being responsible for the impact of our actions, then it ends up becoming kind of selfish.
Mhm. Well, yeah, we've done like 120 episodes. It's kind of our thing here is intent versus impact.
Love it.
Um, Anything else that comes to mind for you that we should cover while we're here?
So I think there is definitely a little impact from the political landscape, especially after the timestamp you just gave us of where we are right now. It's important if people really do want to help to be more familiar with the issues and understand what the people in power, especially on a local level, are doing and what their stance is on supporting people who are unhoused, or what kind of funding can go towards those organizations that are helping people who are unhoused. It's definitely a one topic in a much larger political landscape, but it makes a huge impact at the end of the day, especially local, state, federal level, all of it.
Yeah, I think it's a perfect point to make that, like, if you're going to donate an hour of your time to give out food somewhere and pat yourself on the back for that, that doesn't nearly outweigh the damage you may have done by voting for folks who are further harming this population. And so think of the progress we could make if we did some research on the issues and knew the candidates who were involved and voted for people who were going to fund programs and even work toward the prevention of people being, unhoused in their lives. And if we could, with a single vote, help prevent that, then that's worth way more than donating a few cans of soup. And so the cost benefit analysis there, I think, is something that's worth pausing on.
Mhm. Yeah, and the only other thing I can think to mention is just, I think, like we mentioned before, that there's a lot of stereotypes that come when viewing unhoused people. And hey, we would love to help, but I don't want to get too close to this situation. This could be dangerous. This could be contagious. This could be whatever kind of inflated idea you have of people who are different than you or marginalized populations. I really recommend just getting your hands dirty a little bit. It's places are always going to be happy for donations, especially cash or in kind. But, going to those soup kitchens that are looking for volunteers, speaking to the people you're actually working with and getting to know them better, it goes a really, really long way. People who I've worked with over the years have been some of my favorite people I've ever met in the entire world. They've challenged my worldviews. They have made me think about things I've never thought about before, but they've also just been some of the most kind, inviting people that you get a chance to work with too. And I think sometimes people get a little afraid of that because of how normalized it is, or how it's like, oh, this person's actually not that different than me, and that scares me. So any type of engagement, I feel, is just so helpful to challenge your perception of the unhoused, how people got there, what circumstances they're in, and also, understanding that there's opportunities for everyone to pull themselves up and to get the help and services. Housing first is a very big policy in the United States right now in terms of shelters, housing, and homelessness. And it's the concept that if we can provide people the basic necessities of housing and having a place to sleep, then they can have the stability to work in other areas of their lives they may need assistance with. It's based off of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the idea that we are not able to take care of maybe our mental health, addiction, other things we're struggling with, if we don't feel safe and secure or know that we have a place to sleep tonight. So, housing first is a really great model, and it's doing a lot. It's evidence-based practice. It's very, very well researched and showed to be very successful. But housing really, really is the first step for a lot of people to receive other services that they need.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's a really great point, because unfortunately, I still occasionally hear someone shout on the street to a person who's living on the street, "Why don't you get a job?" And I always think to myself, you know, I don't know if I would even know how to get a job if I didn't have an address to put on an application. Like, where do you even begin? And so, the idea of housing first is just so important, that if a person could have the stability of a roof over their head and safety and security, and heck, an address that they can write on an application, things could really happen for them. But until that time, it seems completely unreasonable to me to be shouting things like that at people.
Absolutely. I have a short anecdote that I like to share because this was one thing that kind of helped me with my career path when I was younger. I was a theater kid when I was little, and in high school, I was in this play called The Boys Next Door, and it's all about these men who have some serious mental illness living in a group home. So people who are down on their luck, marginalized populations. And it was really intensive for a group of high school kids to perform in that and embody what serious mental illness looks like. But it was a really great experience. And there's one line from the play that I have always stuck with me. And I think part of it is kind of the foundation of my identity as a social worker. It may have just been imbued very young. But there's a scene where this man who has schizoaffective disorder and has a lot of trouble communicating audibly and cognitively with folks. He has this, in theater magic, he has a moment where he's able to speak clearly and communicate to others. They're not able to hear it, but again, it's a stage moment. He's able to communicate what his experience is actually like for him, how hard it is to not fully be able to function things cognitively, and how people are afraid of him because they could be one chromosome, one step, one bad incident away from being him. It's a really beautiful scene, and there's a line where he says, civilizations are judged by the way they treat their most helpless of citizens. I am that citizen, and when you deny me, you deny your own light. And I always thought, it's like, well, damn, that just really drives the point home, where we are all kind of part of each other in that way. And if we are not helping the most helpless of ourselves, then we're not helping ourselves at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know who said it. It's definitely not me, so I don't get credit for this, but there was, it was floating around social media, but it was the comment was something like, we need to take care of others or treat others well, and the response was, there are no others. That we're all connected. Yeah. Well, you said something really important. Well, you said a lot of really important things, but one thing that stood out to me, as you were talking about how you've gotten to know some folks who you worked with, who you realized were not that different from you. And for a lot of folks, that can be, just like in the play, that can be kind of scary if you realize, well, wait a minute, I had this idea that people who are unhoused were totally different from me. And when we realize that maybe they're not, it's kind of scary to realize how close we could be. And for a lot of people, that feels too vulnerable, too weird, and they won't even allow themselves to know that. Just knowing that is too much, so they're not going to know that. And I think there's the opposite thing that happens too. The opposite thing that I've seen is sort of this, I don't know, I'm going to call it like the ideal quote needy person, that like folks want to give to someone who says, oh wow, thank you so much, you've just made my life so much better, and you've saved me, and you've made everything happy now, and I won't cry anymore, and like this image of like, I've helped you in some way, and now you're so grateful. And I think people struggle when they meet actual surviving folks out there in the world who aren't particularly grateful for something that you've given them, and maybe don't respond with a thank you and a smile. I wonder what you think about that, like what we could say to people to help them understand why maybe not everyone's going to react to you the way that you wanted them to.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like, first off, if you're doing that to get a reaction, that's going back to our intent versus impact. But I think that can be surprising when you think you know what's going to change someone's life, or what you can do to, feel good about the impact that you have. And it can be jarring to get a completely different reaction like that. I think, the best advice or steps you can take if that's happened to you, or if you're worried that's going to happen to you, is really, it's a cliche, but walk a mile in their shoes. Like, talk to them more, get to understand that like this is a nice thing that may be happening for them right now, but they may not know where they're going to sleep tonight. They may not know where their next meal is coming from. They may have their thoughts on other things right now. They may be struggling with addiction or mental illness. There may be other things happening that are not going to, get the reaction that we are expecting. And that's okay. If you take the time again to listen and understand what people may actually need, that can have a long lasting effect, more than what we think is going to be impactful for people. And even if you don't see the results right away, it doesn't mean that any, kindness or anything that you extended to that person is not going to have an impact later on in their life. I think we can know as social workers that we do not always get to see the impact of our work, and it's really, really tough. But you can always just hope that, like, at least this is something that was helpful for the person at this point in their lives, or we can hope it can be. And so if they are struggling, there may have been something impactful that happened in that moment.
Yeah. 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 I think you're right that the small things that we contribute probably are making a difference. And even when they're not, or even when, like we said, maybe the moment doesn't feel particularly warm and fuzzy, I think we need to let go of some of those expectations. I can tell a quick anecdote and then we can start to wrap up here. But I can think of a time where I I left a restaurant with a lot of food, like untouched food, not food I had picked or eaten out of or anything. It was like entire plates that for whatever reason didn't get eaten, and they were about to go in the trash. And I did offer it to someone who I walked by, and that person said, "No, thank you. I don't like that." And I remember in the moment being like, "What do you mean, no, thank you?" And then I didn't say it out loud. I think out loud I said, "Okay, no problem," and I walked away. And I just have to admit that deep down I was feeling a little rejected, and deep down I was feeling a little unappreciated. And then I thought to myself, you know what, Kate, that's a person who doesn't get to make a lot of decisions and doesn't often feel a lot of power, and that person did just get to make a decision for themselves and call their own shots was cool. So let it go, just move on. And I did, I let it go. But I think I was falling into that pattern of like, I had an expectation of someone saying, "Oh, thank you, dear." And when I heard, "No, thanks, I don't like that," I know I don't like admitting it, but I will admit I had a little like, "Excuse me?" Excuse me. But I've learned that like that's me, like that's my stuff that I have to work on, because it isn't about getting the thank you or the walking away feeling warm and fuzzy. It was, I didn't want food to go to waste, and it seems like it would have gone to waste either way if that person took it or not. So it's okay, and I'm happy that they got to make a decision for themselves.
I think that's a great way to look at that situation, where it's like the person does get to have that self-determination in the moment. And I think when people don't have that self-reflection that you had in the moment, it can quickly turn sour and bitter and be like, "Well, this person's ungrateful. Like they don't deserve, like here I am trying to help." And we throw that word ungrateful out all the time, where it's like, well, again, you're not really asking what a person wants. Maybe they're allergic, maybe they don't like that food and they just don't want, or maybe again, something else is going on and they don't want to respond in that moment. Just because we are thinking we're giving people what they need doesn't mean that they have to accept it. And on a silly note, it reminds me of that episode of Seinfeld where they're doing the muffin tops and they donate all the muffin bottoms to a homeless shelter. And the shelter's like, "We don't want the muffin bottoms. Like no one here wants to eat them. It's the worst part of the muffin." But again, it's just the idea that like, if we just think we can, two birds with one stone, we're not wasting food, but also people need it. They get to say no to the muffin bottoms if they don't want the muffin bottoms.
Yeah, you're right. I forgot about that one, but as soon as you mentioned it, I was like, yes, it's kind of the same thing. Um, Thank you so much for doing this. And before we totally say goodbye, I really want you to say a little bit about your podcast. I know it's like it's like a total turn to the left here from what we've been talking about. So listeners, brace yourselves. We're going to change the subject dramatically. But Mo has a podcast, and I think everybody should know about it.
Yeah, thank you so much. First of all, thank you for having me. This was really fun. And then if listeners, if you guys like silly things or quoting Seinfeld or silly fun things like that for podcasts, me and a group of friends do a movie trivia quiz show podcast. It's a mouthful. Called What Did We Just Watch? So we just watch a lot of obscure movies and then talk about them together. And we welcome anyone to follow us if they're interested. We're at What Did We Just Watch pod _ on Instagram.
Love it. I'm gonna check it out. I hope everybody does. Mo, I may have you back sometime because I really do want to do an episode on performative helping. And so you might just be the perfect person to talk to about that. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. One of my grad school research papers was on it was an international social work class, and I did it all on slacktivism. So that's kind of where my passion for that came from.
Okay. All right. We'll be in touch.
Take me in your arms. I don't want to miss a day without you. Let's stay young forever. There is nothing we can't do. And nothing can break us apart when we're together. Facing the sky, we know that we can fly on the wings of love. And we can climb on every mountain top. I never knew eternity was real till I met you. Since that day, I live in a dream.